Day 62. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. The FBI has DNA from the crime scene. They have footage of the suspect. They have access to investigative genetic genealogy, the same forensic technology that identified the Golden State Killer after more than 40 years. After 62 days, they still do not have a name. That is not a failure of resources. More than 30,000 tips have come in from across the country. The FBI has raised their reward to $100,000. The Guthrie family is offering $1 million for information that leads to Nancy's recovery. Investigators have executed court-authorized search operations. They have seized at least one vehicle. They have taken people in for questioning and then released them. They have done everything you would expect them to do. And the man on camera still has no name. Today, this video is not asking who took Nancy Guthrie. That question has been asked 62 times once for every single day she has been missing. Today we are asking something more precise. The FBI has DNA recovered from a glove found 2 miles from her home. They have DNA collected from inside the house itself. They are actively running investigative genetic genealogy. So why, on day 62, does none of that DNA have a name attached to it? The answer is not what most coverage has been telling you. Before we go further, a correction worth making. A number of outlets have been reporting this as a Tucson case. That framing is not quite accurate, and the difference matters more than it sounds. Nancy Guthrie lived in Catalina Foothills, an unincorporated community in Pima County, situated north of Tucson. Unincorporated means the Pima County Sheriff's Department, not Tucson City Police, holds primary jurisdiction over this investigation. That single detail shaped every major decision made here, from which agencies were brought in to which laboratory received the DNA evidence first. On the evening of January 31st, Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, dependent on a pacemaker and daily heart medication, shared dinner with her daughter Annie at a nearby home in the same neighborhood. She was driven back to her house on North Camino Escalante that night. The porch light was on, the door closed behind her. At 2:28 in the morning, her pacemaker stopped syncing with her Apple devices. She was reported missing the following day around noon, after she did not appear at a friend's home for an online church service they had planned to watch together. When investigators arrived, there was blood on her front porch. It was hers. There was also a man on her Google Nest doorbell camera, armed, masked, standing in the dark with no streetlights anywhere in sight. Subscribe to Cold Case Files USA. We are tracking every development in this case, and the next significant update could come at any moment. There is one detail in that doorbell footage, one specific action that man took that investigators have kept returning to. We will get there. But first, let us look at exactly what DNA evidence the FBI is working with right now and why 62 days in, none of it has produced a single name. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old and the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of the Today Show on NBC. She lived alone in Catalina Foothills, an unincorporated community north of Tucson in Pima County, Arizona. On the evening of January 31st, her family dropped her off at home after dinner. That was the last time anyone saw her. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos stated publicly from day one that he believes she was abducted and did not leave voluntarily. A multi-agency investigation involving the FBI, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and search and rescue teams has processed more than 30,000 tips. As of day 62, no suspect has been named, no motive has been confirmed publicly, and Nancy Guthrie has not been found. Here is exactly what investigators are holding in their hands right now, and why it has not yet been enough. The FBI is not working with one DNA sample. They are working with at least 3 from 3 different locations, collected under 3 different circumstances, each presenting a different forensic problem. The first is the simplest. Blood found at the entrance to Nancy Guthrie's home on North Camino Escalante has been confirmed by investigators to belong to Nancy. That sample is hers. That is not in question. What it tells investigators is that she did not leave quietly. Something happened at that door. The second sample is the one drawing the most public attention. A glove was recovered approximately 2 miles from her home. The FBI confirmed it contains a DNA profile belonging to an unknown male. Visually, investigators say it appears to match the gloves worn by the suspect captured on her doorbell camera. That visual comparison matters, but it is not the same as a forensic match. The DNA from that glove was submitted to CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database containing profiles from millions of convicted offenders and arrestees. It returned no match. The man who wore that glove, if it is the man on camera, has no prior DNA on record with federal law enforcement. That is the sample currently running through Investigative Genetic Genealogy. The third sample is the one almost no coverage is spending enough time on. Inside Nancy Guthrie's home, investigators collected what Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos has described publicly as a biological puzzle, a mixture, DNA from what may be multiple individuals, layered together in a single sample, currently being processed at a private laboratory in Florida. Nanos told NBC directly, "We believe we may have some DNA there that may be our suspect, but we will not know until that DNA is separated." The word may appears twice in that sentence. After 62 days, that is the level of certainty the investigation is sitting with on its most significant interior evidence. There is one detail about where that DNA was sent that investigators hoped would not become a story. It did. The FBI offered early in the investigation to process evidence at their laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, one of the most advanced forensic facilities in the world. Nanos declined. The DNA went instead to a private lab in Florida. When that decision became public, Nanos pushed back at a press conference on February 17th. His exact words: "They were never not a part of the investigation." The double negative in that sentence was not an accident. It was constructed very carefully to deny a specific accusation without making a specific claim. Whether the choice of lab affected the timeline of results is not something investigators have directly addressed. They are not saying it slowed things down. They are not saying it made no difference. They are saying the investigation is active and the lab work is ongoing. In an investigation like this, that specific silence is a choice. Now, the person who understands exactly what these DNA samples could produce and what stands between them and identification is not a television commentator. CeCe Moore is not a forensic hobbyist with a podcast. She is the investigative genetic genealogist whose work directly led to the identification of Joseph James, D'Angelo the Golden State Killer, a serial offender who evaded law enforcement for more than 4 decades. She applied the same IgG methodology, now being used in the Nancy Guthrie investigation. She knows precisely what the technology can do, what it requires, and where it fails. When Moore speaks about this case, she is not speculating. She is reading a forensic situation she has navigated before. Moore has said publicly she finds it very hard to believe the perpetrator did not leave DNA behind. She has said she would go back into that house and re-swab. She is specifically interested in what she calls rootless hair, hair without a follicle attached, the kind that falls naturally, the kind a person does not even realize they are leaving behind. IgG can work with a rootless hair, a single strand, if the profile is clean enough. The problem is that clean profile. Investigative genetic genealogy does not search a criminal database. It searches family trees. When the FBI runs the glove DNA through IgG, they are not looking for the suspect himself. They are looking for his relatives, cousins, siblings, parents, people who uploaded their own DNA to ancestry platforms out of curiosity, not crime. From those familial matches, genealogists build trees, cross-reference age and geography, and narrow the field until a name becomes unavoidable. That process worked on the Golden State Killer in under 72 hours, once a clean sample was in hand. The operative phrase is clean sample. The mixture inside Nancy's home, the biological puzzle, cannot go into IgG in its current state. It must be separated first. Each contributor's profile must be isolated. That process requires multiple rounds of laboratory analysis before a single strand can move to the next step. Every round takes time. And until that separation is complete, the most important evidence collected inside that house is sitting in a Florida laboratory, still waiting to speak. But the DNA and the lab decision are not the only things stalling this investigation. On the night of February 13th, 13 days after Nancy disappeared, Pima County Sheriff's units moved on a residential address located approximately 2 miles from her home. Roads in the surrounding area were closed to the public for roughly 4 hours. 2 individuals were removed from the property. A gray Range Rover in the parking lot of a nearby restaurant was seized and towed away. One of the 2 individuals was taken in for questioning. The FBI requested that no public statement be issued. By the following day, that individual had been released. And since that night, no update has mentioned the Range Rover. No update has named the person questioned. No update has explained what, if anything, was found. They are not saying the operation produced evidence. They are not saying it produced nothing. That address, that vehicle, that person, they have been silent for nearly 50 days. That silence is where Part 4 begins. The February 13th operation was not a precaution. It was court-authorized. That means investigators brought evidence before a judge, enough evidence that a judge agreed probable cause existed to enter that property and seize that vehicle. On that night, the Pima County Sheriff's Department believed they were going somewhere meaningful. The individual questioned was released the next day. The Range Rover has not been mentioned since. Two outcomes are possible. Either investigators searched and found nothing that connected that address to Nancy's disappearance, or they found something that moved the investigation forward in a direction that has not been made public. In either case, the silence that followed was deliberate. FBI requested it directly. And when the FBI asks a county sheriff to stay quiet about an operation, that request does not come without a reason. Now look at the doorbell footage one more time. Not at the mask, not at the backpack. Look at what the man does with the camera before he moves toward the house. He does not cover the lens with his hand. He does not use tape. He does not use cloth. He picks up leaves from near the entrance and uses them to partially obstruct the camera. Leaves. This man arrived at that property carrying a holstered firearm, wearing gloves, wearing a ski mask. He had planned this. The premeditation is visible in every piece of equipment he brought with him. But when the moment came to deal with the camera, he reached for something growing out of the ground. That specific detail has been noted by retired FBI analysts reviewing the footage. One described the suspect as not appearing sophisticated enough and cited this moment as the reason. The FBI recovered this footage not from the device itself, but from deep within Google's back-end server systems. The camera had captured what it captured before the leaves made full contact. Here is what that one action tells us. This is a person who prepared. They had a weapon. They had a mask. They had gloves. The operation required planning over days, possibly weeks. And yet, in the one moment that required an improvised decision blocking the camera, they used whatever was within arm's reach. A 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack, a holstered firearm, a ski mask covering everything except the eyes, and leaves from the ground. What does it mean when someone is simultaneously sophisticated enough to plan a kidnapping and improvised enough to cover a camera with foliage? What does it mean about this person's background, their training, the environment they came from? No investigator has publicly answered that question. If you are watching this footage and something in it looks familiar, the silhouette, the way the person moves, the holster, the specific way they carry the backpack, the FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. The reward stands at $100,000 from the FBI and $1 million from the Guthrie family. If you have been following this case since the beginning or found us today, subscribe to Cold Case Files USA. We will be here when the DNA lab produces a result. And based on what we know about how this technology works, that moment is not a question of if. They have the DNA. They have the footage. They have a court-authorized operation pointing at a specific address, a specific vehicle, a specific individual, and none of it has yet produced a name. The question is no longer whether investigators have enough to work with. The question is what exactly is standing between the evidence they have and the name they need. There is one piece of physical evidence in this investigation that almost every major outlet mentioned once and never returned to. Not the DNA, not the gloves, not the backpack that has become the most recognizable detail in the case. The holster. The suspect visible on Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera is carrying a firearm. It is holstered on their body, not in the backpack, not in a hand. Holstered and ready. Investigators and outside analysts reviewing the footage have noted specifically that the holster appears distinctive, not a standard commercial carry holster. Something specific enough that retired FBI agent Jen Coffindaffer, speaking publicly about the investigation, confirmed that the holster is among the items. Investigators are actively following leads on alongside the backpack, the clothing, and the shoes. A holster is not a disposable item. It is fitted. It is chosen. It is often purchased through a retailer with records or through a specific online channel that caters to a particular community of buyers. If someone watching this footage recognizes the make or the mounting style of that holster, that single identification could narrow the field of possible suspects more quickly than almost any other piece of physical evidence currently available to the public. The FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. The footage is publicly available. Look at the holster, now. While investigators are waiting on the laboratory in Florida to separate the biological puzzle collected from inside that house, they are working a second track that most coverage has underweighted. The pacemaker. Nancy Guthrie's cardiac device stopped syncing with her Apple devices at 2:28 in the morning on February 1st. That timestamp has been repeated so many times that it has almost lost meaning. But a pacemaker is not simply a clock. It is a continuous physiological recorder. It logs heart rate, it logs rhythm irregularities. It logs the electrical activity of the heart under stress, including the kind of acute stress that accompanies fear, physical exertion, or trauma. In cases where pacemaker data has been entered as evidence, it has spoken when the victim could not. Investigators have confirmed they are analyzing the pacemaker data. What that data contains has not been released. They are not saying the data shows distress at 2:28. They are not saying it shows nothing. They are analyzing it, and they have said enough to confirm it is worth analyzing. In an investigation where every public statement is measured and deliberate, that confirmation is not casual. There is one more detail in the February 13th operation that has received almost no sustained coverage. When Pima County Sheriff's units moved on that residential address 2 miles from Nancy's home, they did not act alone. The FBI was present. The roads were closed for 4 hours. 2 people were removed. One was questioned through the night and released the following morning. The second individual, the other person removed from that property, has received almost no mention in any subsequent reporting. Not their name, not their connection to the address, not whether they were questioned, cleared, or remain under any form of scrutiny. One person got released and told reporters they hoped investigators would find the real suspect. The second person has been absorbed entirely into the silence that followed. That silence is now 49 days old. Investigators are also sifting through the ransom notes. Multiple outlets received them. The content of those notes has not been made fully public at the request of law enforcement, but what has been confirmed is that they contain specific details about Nancy Guthrie's home and what she was wearing on the night she disappeared. That level of detail is not something a stranger assembles from public information. Whoever wrote those notes either had direct knowledge of the property or had access to someone who did. That is not a small thing, and yet no arrest has followed from it. No person of interest has been named in connection with the notes. There is one detail in those notes that investigators kept returning to in the early days of the investigation. We will get there in a moment. But first, the notes themselves contain an anomaly that cuts to the center of what makes this case so difficult to read. They were not sent to the family. In February of 2026, on the night that Savannah Guthrie stood in front of a camera and said, "We will pay," said, "This is very valuable to us," said, "Please return our mother." The people who sent those ransom notes were not watching a grieving daughter address them directly. They had sent their demands to TMZ, to a local CBS affiliate in Tucson, to television stations that broadcast to the general public. Not to law enforcement, not to the Guthrie family, not to the one channel that could have moved money. A ransom note sent to a television station is not a negotiation. It is a performance. That framing changes the question. If the goal was money, the notes went to the wrong recipients. If the goal was something else, attention, spectacle, misdirection, then the notes went exactly where they were supposed to go. 2 deadlines written into those notes passed without incident. Nothing happened when they expired. No follow-up communication was sent to the family directly, and the FBI has never publicly confirmed that the person or persons who sent those notes are the same person or persons who took Nancy Guthrie. Those are 2 separate questions that have been treated as one in most coverage. They are not the same question. Investigators know this. Sheriff Nanos confirmed that the notes were being analyzed and shared with the FBI. He confirmed that authorities declined to state whether the notes were sent by someone actually holding Nancy. That ambiguity is deliberate, and it means that 62 days in, the ransom notes, the most dramatic public communication in the entire case, may have come from someone who read the news and decided to insert themselves, rather than from the person who knows where Nancy Guthrie is. The Guthrie family has lived inside that ambiguity for 62 days. Savannah Guthrie posted videos in the first week asking for proof of life. She addressed the possible kidnapper directly. She said her family was willing to pay. By February 24th, she stood before a camera again, this time announcing a $1 million reward, and said something no child should have to say publicly about a parent, that while the family still believed in a miracle, they also knew she may already be gone. She did not say she was gone. She said she may be. That distinction is the entire emotional geography of this investigation. It is where the family lives. It is where the investigators work. It is the space between a confirmed disappearance and an unconfirmed death, with 62 days of silence filling every inch between. Before we go further, one word in the comments is enough. If you are praying for Nancy Guthrie and her family today, leave it there. Amen. Praying, whatever you carry. One word from this community is not nothing. It is a reminder that Nancy Guthrie is a real person, not a case number, and that someone out there is still waiting to bring her home. Now, the FBI has been reducing field personnel in Tucson. Multiple outlets confirmed this in March. The Sheriff's Department released a statement saying they were refocusing resources while simultaneously insisting the case is far from cold. Nano specifically said the investigation will not be considered cold as long as there are leads to pursue. Reducing field agents while maintaining the investigation as active is not a contradiction, it is a transition. The phase that requires hundreds of people canvassing neighborhoods and following physical leads has run its course. What remains is laboratory work, genealogy processing, data analysis. Those tasks do not require agents on the ground in Catalina foothills. They require scientists in a laboratory in Florida and genealogists running family trees against a DNA profile recovered from a glove found 2 miles from the home of an 84-year-old woman who has not been seen in 62 days. The field has gone quiet, the lab has not. And somewhere in that lab, a biological puzzle collected from inside Nancy Guthrie's home is still being separated, layer by layer, looking for one profile clean enough to send to the next step. What that step could reveal, and why it may already be closer than the silence suggests, is what comes next. Here is what we know with certainty, and here is what remains reported but unconfirmed because you deserve to know the difference. What is confirmed? The FBI is running investigative genetic genealogy on the DNA profile recovered from the glove found 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. That profile belongs to an unknown male. It returned no match in CODIS. IgG is now the active pathway. This has been confirmed directly by the FBI to Fox News Digital and NBC News. What is confirmed? A separate biological mixture collected from inside the home is being processed at a private laboratory in Florida. Sheriff Nanos confirmed this to NBC. He confirmed that separation of the mixed profiles is required before that material can move forward. He confirmed the process requires laboratory analysis at each step before the next step can begin. What has been reported by investigators and analysts with direct operational knowledge but has not been confirmed officially by the FBI, that the mixture inside the home may contain DNA from the suspect. Nanos used the word may. He used it twice. That is the language of a man who believes something strongly enough to say it out loud, but not strongly enough to stake the investigation on it publicly. What has not been confirmed by anyone in an official capacity, whether the IgG process on the glove DNA has produced any familial matches, whether any family trees have been built, whether any names are being cross-referenced against age, geography, and physical description right now. The FBI is not saying IgG has produced a lead. They are not saying it has produced nothing. The laboratory in Florida has issued no public statement. And in an investigation where every silence is a choice, this particular silence has lasted long enough to mean something. Now here is the strongest current theory, not speculation, not forum conjecture, but the framework that emerges directly from the confirmed evidence. The man on that camera came prepared. He had a firearm. He had gloves. He had a mask that covered his face completely, leaving only his eyes visible. He had a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack that investigators have been tracking through purchase records and retail channels since the second week of February. He had a holster. He knew the neighborhood. He knew the house sat on a dark stretch of road without a single streetlight. He knew Nancy Guthrie lived alone. He knew when she would be home that night. C.C. Moore, the genealogist who applied IgG to identify Joseph James D'Angelo after investigators had spent 4 decades looking for the Golden State Killer, has said publicly that she finds it very hard to believe this perpetrator did not leave DNA behind. She is not making a general statement about forensics. She is reading this specific scene with this specific level of preparation and concluding that a person who touched that home, who moved through those rooms, who came into physical contact with an 84-year-old woman left something behind. Hair, skin cells, sweat inside a glove, something. Moore has also said she would go back and re-swab, that she would look for rootless hair, in particular the kind of trace evidence that does not require a follicle, the kind the body sheds without any action or awareness from the person it came from. She said this on the record, with her name attached, with her credentials intact. She is not guessing. She is describing a methodology she has used to solve cases that spent decades unsolved. If Moore is right and her track record gives that word weight, then the DNA is there. The question is only whether the laboratory has found it yet, isolated it, and produced a profile clean enough to enter into the genealogy pipeline. CTA 4. If you have information about this case, about the suspect's physical description, about that holster, about the Ozark Trail backpack, about anyone who matched that height and build in the Catalina foothills area in late January, the FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. Pima County Sheriff's Department tip line is 520-351-4900. The reward from the FBI is $100,000. The Guthrie family reward is $1 million. Both lines are still active. Both rewards are still in place. Now look at the holster one more time. This is the detail that has received the least sustained public attention, and it may be the one most likely to produce an identification from someone watching this video. The suspect in the doorbell footage is carrying a firearm in a holster mounted on their body. Investigators and outside analysts have described that holster as distinctive, not standard. Not the kind of universal carry holster available at any sporting goods retailer. Jen Coffendaffer, a retired FBI special agent who has reviewed the footage, confirmed specifically that investigators are following leads on the holster alongside the backpack and other items of clothing visible in the footage. A distinctive holster is purchased somewhere. It is selected for a reason. Certain holster styles are favored within specific communities: military veterans, competitive shooters, security professionals, people who carry in specific working environments. The design, the mounting position, the retention mechanism, these details speak to background and training in ways that a generic backpack does not. Here are the confirmed facts around it. The firearm is holstered on the body, not stored in the backpack. The holster is visible in footage recovered from Google's back-end server systems. Investigators are actively pursuing leads connected to it. No arrest has followed from those leads as of day 62. What kind of person selects a holster that specific and then uses leaves from the ground to cover a camera? What does that combination of tactical, precision, and improvised decision-making tell us about who this person actually is? What environment did they come from? And what environment are they in now? No one in an official capacity has answered those questions publicly. If you recognize that holster, the mounting style, the retention design, anything specific about how it sits on the body in that footage, 1-800-CALL-FBI. The night of January 31st, Nancy Guthrie sat at her daughter Annie's kitchen table for dinner. She was driven home afterward. She walked through her own front door. She was 84 years old, and she had lived in that neighborhood long enough to know which neighbors kept which hours, which lights stayed on, which mornings brought which sounds. She relied on a pacemaker and medication she took every day. She had no cognitive impairment. She was simply a woman who had come home after dinner with her family in a house without a streetlight on the street outside. At 2:28 in the morning, the device keeping her heart in rhythm went silent on every screen that had been tracking it. That is the last confirmed biological signal from Nancy Guthrie. It has now been 62 days since that signal stopped. The investigation's current posture, as of the most recent confirmed updates through the end of March, is this. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has stated the case remains active and will continue until Nancy is located or all leads are exhausted. The FBI has reduced field personnel in Tucson but has not withdrawn from the investigation. Laboratory analysis is ongoing. The mixed DNA from inside the home is still being processed, and IgG is running on the glove profile. The pacemaker data is under review. The tip lines remain open. 2 questions have not been addressed by investigators at any press conference, in any public statement, or through any confirmed reporting. The first, what was found in the gray Range Rover seized from the parking lot near that residential address on February 13th. It was towed away. It has not been mentioned since. The second, who was the second individual removed from that same property on the same night? One person was questioned and released and spoke briefly to reporters outside. The second person has not been named, has not been quoted, and has not appeared in any confirmed reporting in the 50 days since the operation took place. Their connection to that address and to this investigation remains entirely unaddressed in the public record. They are not saying the vehicle contained evidence. They are not saying it contained nothing. They are not saying the second individual is a person of interest. They are not saying that person has been cleared. They are saying nothing. And in an investigation where every public statement is weighed and measured, that specific nothing sustained across 50 days is not an absence of information. It is a decision. The FBI tip line remains open. The reward remains in place. And IgG, the technology that identified a serial killer, whose DNA sat unmatched in law enforcement databases for 4 decades, is running right now on a profile recovered 2 miles from the last place anyone saw Nancy Guthrie alive. The fact that Nancy Guthrie was taken from her own home from behind a door she had walked through hundreds of times, in a neighborhood she knew by heart, is not a comfort to dismiss. It is the detail that should stay with us longest, because the vulnerability that made her a target was not weakness. It was ordinary life. An 84-year-old woman living alone, dropped off after dinner, going to bed in a house without a streetlight on the street outside. What happened to Nancy Guthrie is not a story about a failure of caution. It is a story about a specific kind of risk that millions of families are carrying right now without fully recognizing it. The doorbell footage in this case changed the investigation. The suspect attempted to obstruct the camera, but the footage survived because it had already synced to Google's cloud servers. That is not a minor technical detail. It is the reason the FBI has a visual record of a suspect at all. A camera that stores footage only on a local device inside the home, on a memory card, on a hard drive, can be disabled, destroyed, or removed. A camera connected to cloud backup continues recording to a server the suspect cannot touch. If your home has a doorbell camera or any exterior security camera that stores footage locally, that footage is recoverable only if the device itself survives. Cloud Sync changes that equation entirely. For anyone with an elderly parent living alone, that single upgrade is worth making this week. The second lesson from this case involves check-in routines. Nancy Guthrie was reported missing because she did not appear for a scheduled online church service. A friend noticed. That friend called it in. Without that scheduled point of contact, the timeline of the investigation shifts by hours, possibly longer. A daily or near-daily check-in call, a shared location on a phone, a neighbor with a standing arrangement, these are not surveillance. They are the margin between a missing person reported at noon and a missing person discovered days later. The third involves medication dependency. Authorities describe Nancy as a vulnerable adult, in part because of her reliance on daily heart medication and a pacemaker. For families managing the care of elderly relatives who live independently, knowing exactly what medications they depend on, where those medications are kept, and what the medical consequences of missing doses look like, that information belongs in more than one person's hands. It belongs written down, stored somewhere accessible, and reviewed regularly. None of this brings Nancy home, but every case like this one leaves behind something the next family can use. That is the only thing we can offer in the absence of resolution. 62 days ago, we asked a question. The FBI has DNA from the crime scene. They have footage of the suspect. They have investigative genetic genealogy running on a profile with no name attached to it. After everything we have covered today, the biological puzzle inside that house, the holster that does not match a standard profile, the Range Rover that disappeared from the public record, the ransom notes sent to television stations instead of to the family, the question has not changed. It has only gotten heavier. Why does the DNA still have no name? The answer may be sitting in a laboratory in Florida right now, one separation step away from becoming something investigators can use. It may be sitting in the ancestry database of someone who uploaded their DNA years ago to trace a family line, never imagining their information would one day be cross-referenced against a kidnapping case in the Arizona desert. It may be one tip away, one person who watches this footage and recognizes a holster, a backpack, a silhouette, a way of moving through a dark space. If you have been following this case, subscribe to Cold Case Files USA and turn on notifications. When this breaks, and based on what IGG has done before, it will break. We will cover it the same way we have covered every day before it, without guessing, without filling silence with conjecture, with exactly what is confirmed, exactly what is reported, and exactly what it means. And if something in today's video looked familiar to you, the holster, the backpack, the eyes visible through that mask, 1-800-CALL FBI. One call, one tip. That is how cases like this end. Why did he use leaves instead of his hand? The DNA is in a lab in Florida. The name is still unknown, and Nancy Guthrie is still missing.